Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good day to you and possibly evening wherever you find yourselves, and you're probably watching us via our live stream, and you can do that. Welcome to the Health and Wellness Show. I'm Khawa Solomon. Stay with me. The next 60 minutes we talk gender-based violence and the 16 days of activism, as we just saw in the day in South Africa, but so much more still needs to be said, and so much more that we need to highlight. It's 365 days of awareness, of activism against women and children. I welcome you to the show. Remember, you can interact with us via our various social pages, and don't forget, tell your friends, family, and colleagues. They can stream on www.hilaal.tv. You can also check our various uploads just after the show and the repeats of the show as well. But today, let's welcome in studio Dr. Zubaida Dango, who is has a long list of representing and a CV, and we appreciate her time once again representing the women that needs to be highlighted. Assalamu alaikum to you, Dr. Zubaida. Shukran so much for joining us.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And not forgetting, we have Dr. Shaida Umar, who is online with us, a clinical director for the Teddy Bear Foundation. Assalamu alaikum to you, Dr. Shaida.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran for allowing me this opportunity.
Thank you so much for Dr. Shaida for joining us online, as well as Dr. Zubaida in studio. So Dr. Zubaida, founder of Nisa Institute for Women's Development, as well as the National Shelter Movement of SA around South Africa. Just tell us quickly, as a brief introduction, who you represent, how long it's been around for, and what does the Institute and the movement do for society and our women?
So the Nisa Institute is going to be 30 years old next year. And basically, we work with women and children that come from abusive backgrounds and make sure that we offer programs, a whole range of programs, including sheltering. So when women's lives are endangered, they can come to a shelter, and we house them for a period of between 6 and 12 months, but also do a lot of other things during that process. And then we run school programs, we do research, we do training on gender-based violence, and those are some of the programs for the Nisa Institute. The National Shelter Movement is an independent organization, and we have 95 shelters across the country that are affiliated to the National Shelter Movement. And the purpose is to advocate on behalf of women, to be able to speak with one voice, to bring shelters together generally, because before the establishment of the National Shelter Movement, women in shelters were struggling. They didn't have any support. And this way we advocate to government and whoever else, other stakeholders, to ensure that the services that shelters run are more efficient and more effective in servicing women and children that come from abusive homes.
Now, I want to talk about, facilities like this and how we as communities can support it as well, and we will talk about that a little bit later on. But the status it has in society, in communities, is it something that we as everybody in our household, in our family, is it something that we know about, and how easy accessible is it?
So it's easily accessible. It's not always known. In fact, we've just at the end of last year completed a research study which indicated, and this was a research study with women that came from abusive backgrounds. And one of the things that came out of the study was that a lot of women didn't know where to access help. So we try as the National Shelter Movement to raise awareness, but I think much more still needs to be done and continually be done to ensure that more families and more women know that help is actually available and accessible.
Yeah, the sort of programs that the Institute does done, could you just brief us about that?
So
to develop women.
So we do different things. So when women are at the shelter, they are given the opportunity to either study, if that is what they want to do. Otherwise, we offer learnerships where possible, skills development for women. Children are offered opportunity to go to school. Of course, they have to be removed from their existing schools because the area would have changed. And in addition to that, where children are concerned, we take them on trips, educational trips. Some children haven't even seen the zoo. You know, it's as basic as that. So we try to, during their stay, include some of those things. And then we also offer a lot of psychosocial services for women and children. So that would include individual counseling, group counseling. They get 3 meals a day. And I think over and above that, we have organizations in the community that might want to come and support the shelter or women. So we would then be able to ensure that we offer them those services. So with the Nisa Institute, we have a very good relationship with Madrasa Aisha in Lenasia. And so women are able to go there for computer classes. They're able to go there to learn cooking and baking and several other skills. But this is one example of it. There are several others too.
MashaAllah. The focus today, of course, is mental wellness and mental, wellness awareness around GBV. Dr. Shahida, if I can just latch on to you quickly around this aspect, and something that we did touch on, a toxic male representative within our community, within our household. If we can just look at that for a minute, Dr. Shahida, understanding, the role men play in supporting shelters like this, organizations like yourselves, the Teddy Bear Foundation. Let's talk about the awareness around that and how, the male representative in the family, in the community, can better support in a way that, an organization like this thrives and is developed in a way that it actually, for women to gain the most benefit out of it.
So thank you for that question, Hawa. I think for the longest while, men have been identified as the problem, as the challenge, as the perpetrators, and they have not been included in any solution-focused interventions. They've been excluded. And if we look at the structural drivers of gender-based violence, we know that its perpetration, or the highest level and incidence of perpetration, is actually conducted by the male counterpart. And so what I would like to say is that because we've continued over so many years, and I think just listening to Dr. Dango speaking specifically to more than 3 decades working in this sector of gender-based violence, where women have been provided support, intervention, and yet we have not been able to break or disrupt the cycle of gender-based violence, because as we know that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 children are victims of gender-based violence. So the question to ask here is, who is actually responsible or instrumental in playing an integral role in breaking the cycle of violence? So bringing in men and boys into this equation, bringing them into the dialogue, making them part of the solution, or enabling them and empowering them to come forward with solutions. If we continue to do the same things, we're going to find that we are getting the same results, and there has been no progress. So certainly, who are the primary nurturers and socializers in the family? We know it's usually the mother, the biological mother, or the primary caregiver, who is a female, a significant other in the family. And the way children are socialized, where preferential treatment is given to the different genders, where the male child is treated in a specific manner, and the female child, of course, needs to be submissive, subdued, and the responsibilities that are entrusted on the female child are more heavy and burdensome. And of course, the boy child is given specific privileges. And these are the things that we need to address moving forward and working towards some kind of solution.
Could you add to that, Dr. Zubaydah, with regards to men and the integral role that they should be playing in offering solutions with regards to shelters and protecting our women if there aren't possibly shelters around?
So absolutely. I think firstly on the issue of socialization, I think it's really important that mothers have a very important responsibility. And sometimes, depending on the mindset and the understanding that moms have, which contributes to the discrimination with genders in the home, I think that kind of sets a tone, throughout childhood and later on in life. So I think that there's a lot of work needs to be done at that level, firstly. Secondly, yes, I do believe that a lot of work has to be done with men in terms of finding solutions, but also in terms of enabling men to develop a greater understanding of what gender-based violence is. And I think in this respect, we need to be sure that the men and the authoritative people in our communities need to also take greater responsibility in reaching out to men. I think that it's really important not to shove the issue under the carpet, which often happens. And then we kind of look at things retrospectively. Once we've had an incident like this, where Nazreen was murdered. So the point is that we need to start looking at prevention. But I also want to say that it's not only the responsibility of organizations like NISA and the National Shelter Movement. We need to have men come on board to take responsibility to talk to other men. We also need to have our religious leaders and our imams to be able to deal with these issues in the khutbahs much more so than has ever been done before, because the issue of femicide is with us and it's increasing and it's more and more devastating. If you just look at the incident of how Nazreen was murdered with multiple times a screwdriver being inserted into her body. So I think, the image is really tragic. But I think that we need to learn from this. So as a society, I think it's everybody's responsibility, including men, including women. And I think that we can't say it's happening out there because often we get surprised that it's happening, very close to home.
Let's break down some of the reasons why us as women are not maybe standing up or recognizing that we need help, some of the solutions and the mental wellness solutions that we create for the community, both men and women and children in this respect. More on health and wellness just after this short break. Do stay with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very good day. This is your health and wellness show, and we're chatting mental wellness and awareness around GBV, gender-based violence. We have Dr. Shaida Omar, Clinical Director for the Teddy Bear Foundation, as well as Dr. Zubaida Dango, who is the founder of NISA Institute and the National Shelter Movement of South Africa. Dr. Shaida, if I could start with you and understand the sort of cultural barriers that often does occur when there are challenges with awareness around GBV. We did speak about, men and their role that they play and how we need to exactly start from the home, inshallah, and us as mothers to implement that. It's a slow start, but we need to begin today. Let's chat around the cultural challenges, because we all come from different backgrounds, creeds, and races, when it does come to awareness around gender-based violence.
So regardless of the fact of where you come from, what religious you belong to, or what cultural norms you subscribe to, I think the one thing, there's a common thread here. And if we look at the issue of patriarchy, the patriarchal structures which have been deeply embedded into so many homes, families, and into society as well, where, as we spoke previously regarding the stereotypes around masculinity and femininity, the stereotypes that people replay, reenact, because in the way they have been socialized. And as I mentioned earlier, the primary socializers are actually mostly females. And we need to actually go back to the drawing boards to look at unlearning these socializing methods and relearning different socialization approaches, because who are the nurturers and socializers? It's our mothers. They are females. And the way they respond, the way they speak to children, the way they raise them, where they, the message that is conveyed is that it's okay. It's, masculinity is often confused with aggression. And I think there's a similarity or a misperception between aggression and assertion. So the way children are socialized in the home and they grow up is that there's this synonymity between aggression and assertion, and it's okay for the male to assert himself in an aggressive manner, whereas it's not acceptable for a female to assert herself in an aggressive manner. So one needs to look at the patriarchal structures and how that actually contributes to the toxic masculinity that we are faced with. And as part of that toxic masculinity, something that Dr. Dango alluded to, which raised for me a very important issue, the lack of empathy. When she spoke to solutions and bringing in the boy child and bringing in the adult male, that often we find that there isn't empathy. They're not able to identify or even feel with the victim. And I think that is something that should be addressed in dialogues. It's a critical issue that these very women could be their sister, their mother, their aunt, their grandmother, their daughter, their sibling, who are victims of gender-based violence. And in the dialogues and in the workshops that we hold and organize, these issues need to be challenged. We need to unpack and analyze values and attitudes, because where are these values and attitudes coming from? And Dr. Dango also highlighted the issue around the fact that it's a multidisciplinary response. It's the response of each and every one. It's not only the response of government, but society as a whole, including your civil society organizations, your community-based organizations, and the faith-based organizations. So it's a multifaceted approach to intervention, but a multidimensional response to overcoming and disrupting and breaking the scourge of GBV.
So, Dr. Zubaida, understanding that people ask the questions, but why didn't she leave? What makes her stay? Did she not know and realize she was in an abusive situation? And looking at and doing various read-ups and just going into the topic itself, these women don't quite feel that they actually feel that they are the problem. They are causing it. There's this continuous cycle staying in for 10, 20 years. I was chatting to someone yesterday and they said, this couple's been married for 25 years and still their relationship is toxic to their children. They fight all the time. There isn't the physical abuse, but there's that verbal abuse that the children are exposed to. So why do the women, after the man is left or they just keep coming back? They expose themselves continuously. Let's understand that thinking.
So I think Dr. Shaida alluded to the fact that patriarchy is a very important component in all of this. The issues around power and control within marriages are really very critical. However, having said that, one needs to go back. If you backtrack and find out how are girls raised in our societies, are girls really raised to have some kind of self-worth and a good self-concept? What are the levels of confidence of our girls? Our focus is very much on the marriage, but do we really help the girls have a good self-concept? And I think that this is so important. What do we teach our girls as young women, as children, so that they can go into a marriage and understand when things are not going okay, they do have a right to do something about it. Oftentimes, families don't support their girls once they're married. They feel they're married, they should take responsibility. But I think if we haven't trained them well enough in terms of their confidence levels, in terms of their understanding, it's very difficult for them to stand up for themselves. And standing up for themselves doesn't mean fighting back, but you do have a level of dignity that needs to be respected, the issue of self-respect. And from what I've seen in my practice also as a clinical psychologist, is that most of the women coming from abusive relationships don't value themselves in any possible way. From the abuse point of view, they then start believing and internalizing what it is their partners are telling them. They then become ostracized from the rest of their family or communities. And when families don't support them, they become very isolated. And it's very, very hard then to say, what do you do if you have a child or more than one child? Where do you go to? Who's going to support you?
Yeah.
And what are the consequences? And of course, these are questions that are not addressed early on. You know, they come up once incidents actually happen. So I think that we need to be looking at the preparation of our girls in a different way.
So, Dr. Shaida, this then brings up the question around the children that you perhaps work with, because of course they are in a situation, in an abusive situation, which does also taint their self-confidence, their ability to be, okay mentally. How is that worked up again for them to not be in that vicious cycle of an abusive relationship once again?
So just to sketch a landscape, we know that more than 1 in 10 children are exposed to intimate partner violence between their parents. And of course, 1 in 3 children are victims or experiencing acts of violence in the home.
Yeah.
So children are, we need to be aware of the fact that even if they're not direct recipients of any kind of physical abuse or violence, they are still affected. It affects them deeply. It affects them physically in terms of, somatic complaints where they might have medical complications, but there's no plausible explanation for their diagnosis. So emotionally, as Dr. Dango alluded to, the lack of self-worth, low self-esteem, the inability to concentrate. And then if we look at the mental health, the functioning, certainly we're going to find that, we are finding so many more children manifesting with signs and symptoms of anxiety, generalized anxiety, for which cannot actually pinpoint or nail a specific reason that's contributing to it, because then it becomes generalized to all their settings, but also depression. We're seeing a lot of children as young as 8 years old who are presenting with symptoms of depression. And we've also witnessed where children as young as 8 and 9 years old have attempted suicide, and there have been completed suicides as well. So although children may not be directly affected, it's something we cannot gloss over, because these children not only suffer the toxic effects of domestic violence, which affects them, and their long-term implications in terms of their behavior, in terms of their relationships, and how they contribute and perpetuate the cycle of violence. Because some children may become victims and gravitate later on in their lives to relationships where they will continue to remain victims. Other children become victimizers immediately in their relationships with their peers, with their siblings, and overly aggressive or outbursts of unruly behavior, disorderly behavior at school. So there are many manifestations that impact on the mental health, and we cannot take domestic violence lightly or take it for granted. Children, because children may not be direct recipients or victims, that it's not going to affect them.
We talk about the silent violence that happens at home behind closed doors that leaves no marks after the short break, and a solution forward when it comes to drugs, alcohol, and the silly season that awaits us. So more on health and wellness just after this. Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum. It is a sad state of affairs of South Africa being one of the biggest capitals in the world, with a high rates of domestic violence, gender-based violence affecting women and children, child abuse. And we need to talk about it. This conversation goes on, not just for the 16 days of activism, but beyond. And that's one of the reasons why we're highlighting it once again. And the recent uproar of a Muslim sister in our community as well. And figuring out ways and means how you, the neighbor, how you in the family can possibly just not let this happen, even if it's a small chat, a tap on the back, a conversation you need to start in your home and with your own children, inshallah. We have Dr. Shaida Omar online with us from the Teddy Bear Foundation, as well as Dr. Zubaida Dango, head of the Nisa Institute and the South African Women's Shelter, I hope I get that right, National Shelter Movement of South Africa. So Dr. Dango, we know and understand that there's the influence of drug and alcohol, which does make things worse. Looking at the murder case, and as you described, gruesome murder of Nasreen through domestic violence, and just reading up about, not just being today, it's been a possible history of domestic violence in a home. But understanding how drug and alcohol, we know it's a pandemic on its own in our society, how that does influence, and the silent abuse that we don't always recognize.
Yes, I think that the silent abuse is definitely there in our communities, and women often don't talk about the abuse. They're too afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
We come from communities where families are too ashamed to be identified in case their daughter has to get divorced. They feel a sense of shame. And I think it's not only in the Muslim community, it goes across.
Yeah.
Where families don't want to talk about it, they don't want to identify it. And because of this, it leads to consequences like murder or very, very severe abuse that women go through. So alcohol and drug abuse is certainly one or two facets that contribute to gender-based violence. However, those are not the only ones. I think that the whole notion of patriarchy itself, the issue of power and control, how families respond in general to girls versus boys, which we've talked about earlier in terms of the gender roles, all of those things. So it's multifaceted in the way that it presents itself. But the consequence of that is it ends up in women and families being isolated and often not knowing where to get help. You touched on a very important point in terms of bystander observations.
Yeah, secondary victims.
Absolutely. So women or families or communities can often stand by and watch the violence or hear the violence at their next door neighbor's home. But the question is, do we remain bystanders? Do we sit on the fence? And I think that this is so important for every single woman, every single man out there, that we have a responsibility to take some kind of action, as you pointed out. So it may be talking to the woman. It may be necessary to call the police. It may be having a chat with her husband. So there's no one formula. There might be different kinds of situations, but we need to move away from the bystander mentality that exists in our communities.
Very, very true. Dr. Shahid, I want you to come in there. And recently we've also seen a rally, brought about because of the recent murder of Nasreen. Understanding as bystanders and looking at now the silly season. We have to face it, it's coming. And just as we trying to wean down, in fact, I was speaking to some of the medical staff, they say their anxiety levels increases actually. And I'm sure it's the same at your offices. So I know this is here, it's unfortunate, it's here to stay and it's going to happen. How do we, even if it's a rally, even if it's a conversation we need to start, how do we prepare us for the silly season? We know alcohol does exacerbate things. It is upon our doors. How do we protect ourselves, not just the 16 days, but beyond during this festive season, as they call it?
So I think it's something that, a conversation, a dialogue that needs to be held consistently. It's not a once-off conversation. But I also want to just add to what Dr. Dango said, that complacency is being complicit, and that we all become colluders. If we hear, if we witness, and we do nothing about it, we are equally guilty and responsible for people being violated. So it's also reminding people that we all have its co-responsibility, that regardless of who it is, one needs to respond to it immediately and report it. And the important thing to understand and appreciate that people can report it anonymously. If there's fear of reprisal, fear of any kind of comeback where they fear that they will be violated or their family would be violated, it can be reported anonymously. So we urge everybody out there to realize the importance of reporting, because as in the case of Nasreen, if it's not attended to, addressed immediately, it would cost a life. So I would say that during this silly season, this festive season, people let their guard down. People are more relaxed, wanting to enjoy and partake in festivities. And again, I think substances, using drugs and alcohol is a huge contributor. We know that the dynamic of power and control certainly is inherent in the patriarchal structure and the gendered norms, the gendered stereotypes that we've been socialized in and that we are exposed to, that often it is seen as an acceptable thing. But again, I think for victims that are out there that have not come out of the closet, they need to also speak to their children to have safety plans in place where, putting a cell phone aside, packing a bag of clothing, having identity documents, all sorts of things for their child, for themselves, and also informing their children that should anything happen, these are the processes that they will follow through. And so the child is not expected to suddenly respond appropriately and timelessly. These are discussions that to be held. Also to have spare keys of a car, a spare car key, and also to reach out to people that they can trust. And as Dr. Dango indicated, that NISA's there's the General Command Center, Domestic Violence Center, which is available. It's a toll-free line, 24 hours. So again, we appeal to people. If you fear for your child's life, there's Childline, which is a 24-hour toll-free line. There's Lifeline. There's the Command Center. There's NISA, and I think the National Shelter Movement, if people require immediate placement or a safe place to be held and protected in. So again, I'm just going to say communication is key, and to speak to the relevant people that would be directly affected. Of course, we don't want to instill anxiety in children or elevate the levels of anxiety, but at the same time, if it's done age appropriate, if it is done in a gentle way, and explaining to the child or children that it's not acceptable to be treated in this way, that it would be in the interest of all for them to keep silent about the protective measures that are put in place, to keep, a few rands also, or even if one could leave those items with somebody that one trusts outside of the home.
Very good idea. And if you can just make a list of that, inshallah, and keep those numbers ready and handy somewhere, and start with your children so that there is a plan. Anything can happen. We'll talk more on the mental wellness awareness around gender-based violence just after the short break, and focus on that and how you can help others as well. Back in a moment. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Our just last couple of minutes of the show, stay with us around mental wellness and awareness for gender-based violence. The victims are involving women and children, and also to know that it doesn't just happen with women. There are men involved as well, so speak out for them. In studio, we have Dr. Zubaida Dango, the founder of NISA Institute, as well as the National Shelter Movement of South Africa. And we have online Dr. Shaida Umar, who is Clinical Director for the Teddy Bear Foundation. So, Dr. Zubaida, if I come back to what Dr. Shaida elaborated, and she spoke about on having a safety plan, having that available, chatting to your children. But I believe there is one online that viewers can have a look at?
Yes, absolutely. There's a prepared safety plan that's been used by many women already. It's on the National Shelter Women website, which is www.nsm.org.za. So that safety plan has been well thought through, and we've consulted with women, and it's readily available for anybody who might want to use it.
Let's talk around mental wellness and awareness of women. We spoke now continuously of self-confidence, making your children aware, speaking to your girl child, advising them on the male patriarchy that is out there, and the men getting the young boys understanding how they should treat women. What is the mental consideration that we must understand to prepare our girls and the current women that are in this situation, if we happen to find, because that could be the case now, they want to help someone. This has happened now to Nasreen, and apparently through this, many other voices have now come out in the Muslim community of women that are in abusive situation. What is their plan and the way forward mentally?
So I think if you start at a point where women are affected, there are devastating mental illnesses that women that have been abused are going through, ranging from suicide to depression and severe depression, suicide sometimes. And that's sort of at the tail end of it, when women find that they at the end of their tether and can't find any sort of help. They actually slide into one of those kinds of mental illnesses.
Okay.
So the thing is, it's very important to start at a base where children are taught about their mental health, to deal with stress. We often talk about stress with exams, but we don't talk about life stresses. And, how do you cope under different circumstances, around issues with relationships, around family relationships as well. And so I think these are things that can be workshopped and they can be discussed, because there's definitely possibility to learn how one can deal with that stress before you allowed it to continue and just become worse. I think that's very, very important. I also think that we need to be able to share with girl children that it's important for them to go out there and to be able to be confident and independent in who they are. We often see this, that girls are not trained to do this. And why is it, as a community, that we don't go out? We might have young women that are going to high school or university, but oftentimes, where is that self-confidence? It's often lacking, and they're not allowed to talk about their experiences. Even within the context of the home, is there a space for communication? So if it can't be done within the context of the home, then there should be an opportunity to do it with an outside professional.
Very, very true. Understanding that, even as young as a teenager, the minute you find that there is that lack of self-confidence, to reach out for the professional help. So Dr. Shaida, I want to just touch on mental health, and it's still unfortunately loosely spoken about in the community and not accepted as it should and must be. We understand that we talk about it, it's mental health, depression, I'm just suffering from some sort of anxiety. But medically it's proven that just being in a stressful situation. I mean, I've been told that, I've suffered recent trauma and all of a sudden my insulin pushed up, and I couldn't understand that. I went to research and understand that it actually affects your body. It pushes up your high blood pressure. You all of a sudden, could be possibly diagnosed as a diabetic for that matter. So how do we really, how do we really understand and take it forward? Because as parents, we have a right over our children in a way that what we want them to be is how we need to act. And then the influence of the education system that's out there, the support systems. How can we as parents open up the conversation at schools within our community to introduce maybe a self-confidence workshop for girls and boys at schools? How can we use organizations like yourself, like the Shelter Movement and Nisa Institute, to make us aware within our Islamic madrasas, to teach the Muslim, the madrasa teachers, the mu'allimas and the mu'allims of how they can subtly, pursue a voice of giving those girls and boys the self-confidence that they need.
So very important, Hawa. What you've raised is such pertinent issues, and it's not just working with children. We have to look at the whole ecological framework. The positive parenting programs are critical to the development and mental health of children, because working with children, working with educators, working with parents, significant others, people in the workplace, and of course, community-based organizations. So looking at religious leaders, your recreational facilities, people that are out there all coming into contact with children need to be equipped, enlightened, and empowered to work with children, how to respond, how to communicate with children. I think these are critical issues. So workshopping on different levels when we speak about the ecological framework, because it's working on a micro level with the child and the family, working with the immediate structures on a meso level, and on a macro level, also addressing policy and legislation which may violate or transgress the legal or constitutional rights of children. So teaching, I think starting off with children, making children appreciate the importance and the wellness of themselves. So looking at self-nurturance and self-care is critical. And when we move through with older children, the sexual, reproductive health and rights and bodily autonomy issues need to be discussed, where they learn to respect themselves and value themselves first before they actually even relate to the external world or to other people. Because if they are able to accept themselves, love themselves, they would realize that it's not okay, it's not acceptable to be violated by anyone, or for them to violate another person. And of course, working with parents, making them realize unconditional acceptance of their child, because often parents hold children ransom to certain deliverables. They will show love or demonstrate affection only when the child delivers good marks or excels or stands out amongst other children. So these are things that have to be worked on. It's not a quick fix solution. It's a process. I think mental health wellness is a critical issue. If we have more healthy children, we will have healthy adults, and we will have a cycle that will be disrupted, that we will not be exposed to the cycle of perpetual violence or intergenerational patterns of violence.
Thanks, Dr. Shaida. And Dr. Zubaydah, understanding, Dr. As a clinical psychologist, we see women happy, smiling, in good relationships, that everything looks fine and hunky-dory outside. But what are the subtle messages and the signs and the symptoms that we can recognize when we do find that woman could possibly be in an abusive situation, not necessarily from her, but maybe from a husband or even the children, that we can watch out and maybe even help them?
So I think that if you are within the context of a family, if you know your sister or friend very well, and you know what kind of person she was, the kind of behavior she displayed, or what she would do under certain situations, and then to be able to compare that with what it is she's doing now that's different, or that strikes you as very worrying. So you may not have the proof, but you may pick up these signs simply by understanding that she's behaving somewhat oddly. And that might be a clue to start maybe checking with her, or maybe making some observations in terms of why is she doing this? Because women often don't tell.
Silent about it.
They're really silent about it. And so it's hard for families to pick up.
And that's part of the disease, the condition that they're in, to feel that they can't say anything, they don't have a voice.
It is very much a part of it. As I said, it also relates to how we raise, that you need to make sabr, if you're a Muslim woman, that you must tolerate everything. But I think that there's a space to make sabr, but there's also a space where it's okay to actually let go and say, I need help, I can't handle this anymore, I need a lot more support. And if my family can't give it to me, I need to get it outside. We had a situation one time where there was a Muslim woman, a highly educated Muslim woman, who was married, and the family weren't very pleased about her marrying her spouse. She eventually he started abusing her, and the family said, well, we have nothing to do with you because you decided to marry this man. The consequence was she came to us for counseling and to the shelter. We eventually managed to reunite the family with the daughter. And today they are inseparable. But sometimes you need
So she was also in an abusive relationship.
She was in a very abusive relationship. And sometimes you need people to be catalysts. And that is what I see our role as. We don't have to do it for the women, but you need to be a catalyst in order to make sure that you're linking them to the right resources, to the right friends, to the right families, as well as institutional resources.
Absolutely. So the way forward, Dr. Shaida, we do just have a minute or so to wrap up. Again, your message during this festive season and the highlight that this is not just 16 days, but 365 days of activism. So
indeed, Hawa, I think what we need to realize is protect protection of families, protection of children, of women, of victims of violence is not your responsibility. It's not my responsibility. It's our responsibility. It's a collective effort. If we want to break the scourge of violence, as was demonstrated, it affects each and every one of us. And, one should not shy away from the fact that it affects everyone and that everybody needs to act on breaking the cycle of abuse.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Shaida. And Dr. Zubaida, quickly, your last words.
Okay.
And contact details where people can find you.
Right. So I think seeking help is a sign of strength. It's not a sign of weakness.
Okay.
And if anybody needs to go into shelter because they're afraid of their lives, they can call the National Shelter Helpline on 0800 001 005. That would be the one number that you would actually be able to access a shelter anywhere in the country.
Great stuff. Shukran so much to you, Dr. Zubaida, for all your time. And this doesn't end here. We're going to, in the new year, we need to hook up to talk more on the awareness and continuously spread the message of mental wellness around gender-based violence.
We'd be very happy to do that.
All the best, inshallah. There we have it, Dr. Zubaida Dango, who is also a clinical psychologist and heads up the National Shelter Movement for South Africa, as well the Nisa Institute, who does various developments for women in an abuse situation, as well as Dr. Shaida Omar, who is online, joined us online from the Teddy Bear Foundation. Assalamu alaikum to you, Dr. Shaida, and have a good day. And from myself, Khawa Solomon, keep those numbers, write it down, go to the website for that exit plan that you might possibly need one day, and reach out to someone. It's nothing wrong if you need help. Wassalamu alaikum and goodbye for now.